So I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm not going to go on the stage. I'm not really a stage person. So I just asked the camera guy if it was okay if I stood here. I'll introduce myself just briefly, and then we'll just jump right into this. My name is Jeff Hoffman. I'm the chairman of GEN. So on behalf of our organization, thank you all for being here at GEC. We really, really appreciate it. We have an amazing team of people from all over the world that make this happen. And what's amazing is the GEN team and the GEC team here are people that are so service-oriented, you'll never see them. They don't want credit, they just want to do the job. So I couldn't be prouder to be chairman of an organization of people that are so focused on serving others. So thank you very much for being here. My background, very quick, I'm a longtime tech entrepreneur. Been doing startups since I was 20-something, building them my whole life, and I'm going to share with you some of the things we've learned. That's a combination of our own startups, the companies we built, which in the US are, the main one you would know is Priceline.com. If you're not from the US, you know us as Booking.com, but that's actually the same company. So those are startups that were grown from scratch. We've done another one I did after that called ubid.com. We've had our failures, but we were blessed that those three companies that were all startups all turned into multi-billion-dollar global companies. So the question I get asked a lot from people is, what did you have to get right to start on a little table and create global companies? And again, we never set out to build, today everyone talks about the unicorn, the billion-dollar company. We never set out to build a billion-dollar company. We set out to build an amazing company, which is the way you get to that. The company that we built today, I know it's crazy, but it's worth, I think, $170 billion. And never once did we talk about the exit strategy or the value of the company. We talked about what it takes to build a great company with amazing people, incredible products and service, because that's the result of doing that. So what I've been asked to do is share some of the things. I'm going to do this one today, and I'm doing another one tomorrow morning at 11 on how to build your brand and deliver your message to the market. But today, the one that we're going to talk about is talent. And I really want to focus on the fact that the reason this is so important, when I ask startups all the time, when you ask a startup, somebody you know has a startup and they close it, they shut down, and you ask them why they failed, you know what they always say? Startups always say, we ran out of money. But the truth is, you didn't run out of money, you ran out of good ideas. You ran out of innovation. You ran out of resourcefulness. You ran out of figuring it out. Because if you did all those things, you would have never run out of money. So people use funding as a crutch. And I have to say, on behalf of my investor friends, that really came from the investor side of the business. Investors don't make money by not investing. They make money by you taking their investment and turning it into something. So the investor market has always pushed, I'm going to take the side of the entrepreneur, us and the entrepreneur sides, about funding. And the truth is, the scarcest and most valuable resource in the world is not financial capital, it's human capital. And I want you to think about this. If I give a bunch of money to a group of average people, do you know what happens? Nothing. In December, they call me and they say, hey, all the money's gone. We need more money. But if I give a small amount of money to rock star people, you come back and you say, wait, how did you create that? I only gave you this much money. And you know what their answer is? We had to figure it out because we didn't have any money, right? So sometimes I'm walking around companies, and I don't usually say this out loud, but I'm walking around, I'm shaking my head, and I'm saying overfunded. You know why? No sense of urgency, no sense of resourcefulness. They're kind of taking their time. They've lost that fire that you have. So the key to success is not more funding, it's more rock stars. When people ask us, how did 3 of our companies go from startup to multi-billion-dollar companies, I can tell you why. I was walking down the hall one day in our offices. I was looking at the people, and I was thinking to myself, if we switched industries right now, we would still win because all the best people in the whole industry are in this room right now, right? Are in our hallways. Talent is the key to success. So I have to tell you that I run into CEOs all the time. They come up to me and they say, Jeff, I'm working harder than I've ever worked before. I'm putting in more hours and my company's not growing. And the reason, the thing they don't realize is you're the problem. You're in the way. You cannot grow until you let go and get out of the way. For me, I always thought, what does a leader do? A leader, in fact, one day my daughter said to me, are you the boss at work? I said, yeah, why? She said, what do you do all day? And I said, what do you think I do? And my daughter said, you just walk around and tell everybody else what to do. Well, that's what we think the leader does. But the simple truth is, for me, success didn't happen until I realized this. Real leaders don't create followers. They create other leaders. I rewrote my own job description to say I need to spend less time running the company. I need to spend more time finding people smarter than me and raising them as leaders and then getting out of the way so that they can run the company. That is when you will grow, when you stop thinking that you're smarter than everybody else. Just because it's your idea, it's your company, you're the founder. I hear this all the time. I sometimes have CEOs and founders that are giving a pitch. And I'll say, like, by the way, who's that you didn't introduce? Like, oh, she runs marketing, but I'm the founder. And I was like, okay, but she's smarter than you and she presents better, so would you please let her talk? And you know what they say? Well, no, it's my company, I'm the founder. And I have to tell people, do you want to get funded or you just want to be right? Because on the path you're on, you can be right all you want, but there's no way we're going to back you. She should be running this part of it. So until you realize that your job is to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. Here's the other thing that blows me away. We don't realize that everyone in this room, every one of us, is only good at one thing. And you know what throws that off? You have a startup and it's a small company, so as an entrepreneur, you are wearing 7 hats, right? You're doing marketing, you're doing product, you're doing the books and paying the bills, and it's going well. So you know what you start to think, I must be pretty good at this. You're not, okay? And it's like, I have never hired an engineer who said, let me write the code, then I'm going to do our taxes, then I'll write the marketing copy. It doesn't happen, right? Engineers do engineering, accountants do taxes, marketing people do marketing. So why do you, just because you're the founder or the CEO, think you can do all those things? It wasn't until I figured that out that we were able to start to achieve growth. The key to success is to surround yourself with people smarter than you in every area but the one thing you're good at. By the way, I'm a software engineer. And so my very first company, I started, I was in an airport. I was waiting in line to get a boarding pass from a human being, and the line was an hour and a half and I missed the flight. And I said, I'm never going to miss a flight again. I'll check myself in next time. So I went home, took out a pencil, and when you guys go to the airport today and you check yourself in at a kiosk, you know what I'm talking about? That was my first invention. Created these kiosks, and we were able to sell them in every airport in the world. But at the beginning, I hired 3 people, with the 4 of us were writing code. And all of a sudden I noticed, but I hired really smart, some rock star developers. They were all staring at me, and I said, guys, what's going on? And they're like, dude, we need you to step away from the keyboard. And I said, okay, what for? And they said, you need to stop helping us. And I said, okay, it's my company. And they're like, right, except you're not very good at writing code, and we're really good at writing code. I said, okay, wait, what degree do you have? And they're like, Jeff, we all have software degrees, but somehow we're really good and you're below average. This was a difficult day for me. And I said, what do you guys want me to do? Am I fired? And they're like, no, the product's almost done and none of us know what marketing is. Go figure that out. It turns out My one thing is marketing. If you come to my company, I'm running the marketing meeting. I'm not running anything else. If you come in and ask me a question and it has to do with finance, I won't even answer it. And people will say to me, I know some of you have heard this, you own the company, you're the CEO. You need to know everything that's going on there. That's ridiculous. That's like saying that I should buy a book called How to Be My Own Dentist, because I don't know what my dentist is doing, right? But I still trust him and go there. It's no different for a company. Find the thing you're good at and then spend the rest of your time in a servant leadership role. Finding people smarter than you, raising them as leaders, and getting out of the way. The key to doing that, guys, is hiring rock stars. And let me explain that, because this always amazes me that why people don't hire rock stars. And I'll tell you the punchline. The punchline is hire less people and hire higher quality people. So here's what happens. You go out in the market and you're looking for somebody to hire, and I meet you, but she's a rock star, so she's really expensive. So you know what you do as a business owner? You tell me I can't afford her. She's too expensive, so you don't hire her. So you know what you do instead? You hire 3 average people. And you say, see, Jeff, I got 3 people for the cost of her. Listen, guys, you cannot build greatness on the backs of average. Average people will never produce greatness. Rock stars will. So the advice I'm telling you when you tell me we can't afford rock stars is stop hiring average people, spend all that money on one rock star. One rock star far outperforms 3 average people. And that's the math people don't do. They just say, I can't afford rock stars. So my teams are smaller than everybody else, but I spend the same amount you do on salaries. I just give it to the rock stars because they crush the average people. I hope that makes sense to folks, because it's not what people do out there. They just tell me they can't afford to hire those people. You need to be hiring rock stars. And to give you an idea, I'll just tell you a story that when I was interviewing somebody, and my whole team wanted to hire this engineer. And so I already knew that, so I called him down to my office. And I asked the guy, I said, what do you want to, there was a piece of paper on the end of my desk. And I said, I want you to take that piece of paper and write down the salary you want to work here. And this guy was making $70,000 a year, and he wanted a raise for switching jobs. So he wrote down $80,000. And I said, okay, turn the page over. And I said, what does it say? And he said, the other side of the paper says $85,000. I said, right, because I wrote down what I think you're worth. And he said, okay, Mr. Hoffman, but I'm only asking you for $80,000. And I said, okay, but I wrote down 85 because I think you're worth 85. And he said, but I didn't ask for that. And I said, do you want to continue this conversation? And he said, no, sir, I'll take the 85. That night I was talking to some of my friends who are business owners. And they're like, Jeff, you wasted $5,000. My question to you is, did I? Because you know what would happen? One night I'm walking out and I said, Bill, go home. And he said, I'll go home when I finish this. And I said, finish what? And he turned and looked at me and he said, finish proving that you were right to believe in me. Did I waste $5,000? Did I invest $5,000? He constantly wanted to prove that I was right to gamble on him as an employee. Guess what else happened? When I needed 3 more rockstar developers, guess who do rockstar developers hang out with? Other rock stars. I spent $0 to build a team of rock stars because Bill said, before you hire anybody, can I bring some of my friends in? We had a team of rock stars that I didn't even understand what they were doing half the time. But you need to leave your ego at the door. Say, if you got a tech question, ask Bill. And when someone says, but don't you own the company? You can say to them, yes, but I also don't do my own dental work. I go to my dentist. I let experts handle their responsibility. I just do my piece of it. I want to give you an idea. It's all about leading by serving. Okay, that's super important. Again, what I said earlier, that real leaders don't create followers. You spend your time creating. So I'll ask you a couple questions to think about, anybody in here that owns a company. And this happens to me every time I give this talk. People go home and then they call me and they say, uh-oh, and I said, what? And they said, we took an honest look, and I'm asking you to do the same thing. Take an honest look at your company and tell yourself, but I like it when they call me, if you actually have rock stars, right? Because most of the time people call me and they say there's really no one on our team that's an absolute rock star. We have good people, but greatness doesn't come from good. Greatness comes from rock stars. So I want you to think about that. If you don't have rock stars, maybe it's time to change the makeup of your company to less people but higher grade. You're not changing the amount of money you spend. You just have those people. So how do you get rock stars to work for you? And the answer is that rock stars are the people, they're the best people in any industry, right, in their area. Here's the thing, rock stars know they're rock stars, okay? So they're gonna go to the place, they can work anywhere. The average person needs the job. The rock star knows they can get a job anywhere. They're not worried about that. So they're gonna pick a place to work that fulfills them in different ways. And it's, well, I will tell you that I'm about to tell you a story about serving rock stars and how you get those people. But it was interesting to me because I had a company. I'm going to share some lessons with you. I sold the company. And when I was doing a television interview about selling the company, the media was telling me they were reading all these accomplishments, right? They were talking about our revenues, our margins, our profits, our growth. They said, Mr. Hoffman, these are amazing accomplishments. What are you most proud of? And I will tell you guys, as a leader, when I was driving to the TV station, the head of HR for my company called me and she said, Jeff, I'm so excited. I just verified something I want to share with you. And I said, what's that? And she said, in all the years from the day you started this company to the day you sold it, nobody that worked for you has ever quit. And I said, okay, that's the coolest thing I've ever done as a leader, and I don't know how I did that. So I started calling people from the TV studio. I was like, why don't you guys quit? And they're like, dude, is that a problem? Do you want us to quit? I said, no, but I don't understand why nobody's ever left here. And they said, well, we'll be happy to tell you. I'm about to tell you what they told me. Because I'm like, let me get a pencil and write this down, because whatever I did by accident or instinct, I need to do it on purpose next time. There must be a reason nobody that worked for me had ever quit. We fired people. So it was a learning moment to say, why do you stay here? And by the way, one of the questions you could ask when you get home, which is what I did after that, I went to every employee and I said, it is my personal goal to make this the best company and the best experience you've ever had in your life. What do you need me to do that? And you know what my employees said? One of the reasons we like working here is because you think that you work for us, not the other way around. You do. If you want to achieve greatness, then quit thinking people work for you and work for them. Let me show you what that looks like. I used to write the entrepreneurship column and innovation column for Inc. magazine. And one day they said, tell us about leadership. And so I'm going to tell you the story, but if you want a copy, it's on Inc.com under my name. But here is the story. That was the title. The title of the story was Hire the Best, Then Go Pick Up Their Laundry. So I'm going to tell you guys what I learned that leadership should look like, instead of me telling people what to do. So I'm on the road one day, and my team calls me. And my team says, hey, Jeff, we found this rock star developer. It's a 20-year-old kid. And they said, he's a genius, total rock star. And I said, by the way, I'll tell you how they found him. We were using a software product, right? And I always tell my team, get the rock stars on our team. And so they kept having problems with it. And they would call the help desk for this company. But every time they would call the help desk, they would get frustrated and they would say, can you just put Brian on the line? So everyone in my company, when they called the help desk, they'd say, ask for Brian. So one of them said, why don't we just hire this company's best employee, right? So they said, we met this 20-year-old genius, and I said, don't wait for me. You guys, just hire him. You don't need my permission. So I finally get back in town. Now remember, this 20-year-old kid has never met me. He doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know I'm the CEO. He doesn't know I own the company. I spent the morning looking at his work. And at lunch, I went down the hall. And in the conference room, they were all still working. And by the way, as a business owner, I don't want people to work through lunch. I want them to have a life. I don't want them to burn out. But if they do work through lunch, I always buy lunch for them. And by the way, I have friends of mine that own businesses. And I say I buy lunch for all the employees that are still there. And they're like, I can't really afford that, to buy lunch for all my employees. Let me ask you this math question. Which do you think is worth more, an hour of a genius developer's time or a Subway sandwich? Okay? Because people are like, I can't afford the sandwich. I said, are you kidding? I spent $6 on a sandwich, and I got a guy whose time is probably worth $1,000 an hour, said thanks for the sandwich, and he never left his desk. I don't ask them to do that, but I invest my money wisely. So I walk down the hall into the conference room, and I say to the team, I say, can I get you guys anything? Well, he doesn't know. The kid doesn't know I own the company. He doesn't know who I am. And what I meant was, do you guys want Chinese food, pizza, whatever? And the 20-year-old kid, when I said, can I get you guys something? The 20-year-old glances back, doesn't know who I am, and he said, yeah, would you go pick up my laundry? Well, you can imagine all the air sucked out of the room, right? And I remember it's like in the movies when a soldier steps on a landmine and it goes click, everybody stops because we all know what's happening next. That dude's blowing up, right? Everybody's staring at me to see what I'm going to say because the 20-year-old kid just asked the owner of the company to go get his laundry. They're all staring at me, and here's what I said. I said, sure, where's the ticket? And the kid said, it's on my chair. And so I left. A little while later, I'm in the parking lot, and my two vice presidents come running out. They're like, Jeff. I said, whoa, calm down, what's up? And they said, please, he did not know who you were. He's sorry. He didn't know you were the owner. He didn't know you were the CEO. They're like, why are you guys all excited? And they said, because we don't want you to fire him. And I said, why do you think I'm going to fire that kid? And they said, because you're angry. And I said, why do you think I'm angry? And they said, because you stormed out of the building. I said, okay, I didn't storm out of the building. They said, what are you doing outside? I said, I'm going to pick up the kids' laundry. And they said, wait, you're picking up this 20-year-old kid's laundry? And here's what I told them. I said, guys, that kid is the most brilliant designer I've ever seen. The product he is building will triple our revenue. By the way, I even said, we will probably win an award for the product he's developing. And back then in the internet, they had something called the ICE Awards, Internet Commerce Expo. And I was on stage being handed a trophy from actually Steve Jobs for the best new product in the entire industry that some 20-year-old genius thought up. So I said to them, not only am I going to pick up this kid's laundry, but if you guys need me this afternoon, I will be out back washing that kid's car, okay? That is what I learned about leadership. Your job is to build the company where the best people in the whole industry all want to work for you, and then your job is to keep them there. You do that by serving them and making it the best experience they've ever had. Let me tell you how you attract talent like that, what draws them. When I started asking people, why did you come here and why do you stay here? So I went to a job interview, and I was building a company, and this guy calls me. He goes, hey, Jeff, I'm building a company, and I need to hire a president. You want to come run my company? And I started to say, I'm building my own. But then I started to realize something. I'm a software engineer, and I know this goes for all you guys. How many of you that own your own company hire the people? You do the interviewing. It's your company. And I'm like, I interview people and I hire them because I own the company and I'm the founder. And I do this based on my years of training in HR. No, I've never had one single HR course. I'm a software guy. So I was like, who qualified me to interview people? Am I even doing it right? I'm a software engineer. So I said, I'm going to go to this interview so I can see how did people interview other people so I can get better at it. So I went to the interview. The guy presented me his mission statement and his values. Here's my values, my vision statement, my mission statement. Here's our company's PowerPoint, our plan. So he pitched me his mission, his vision, his company. And then he showed me a job description, told me about the job, and then he told me a salary. A job description is a list of things that if you do these things for me, I will give you money. If you don't, you're fired. Okay? And he's explained the vision. And I was sitting there listening to his mission, his vision, his company. and a job description. And he said to me at the end, he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "If I understood you right, you want me to work 8 days a week so that someday you can buy that boat you have a picture of, right?" And he said, "I didn't say that." I said, "You kind of did. Because you know what, guys? Your mission statement and vision is your dream. That employee didn't wake up saying, 'My life's goal is to make Manny successful.' They didn't wake up wishing they could help you get a boat, right?" So a thought occurred to me when I was driving back to my office. And so now I have a completely different thing that I do. When I interview people, I don't start by telling them about my dream, which is my company. I don't bring up the company at first. I don't say, "Here's our mission, here's our vision, here's our goals," because that's my dream. He didn't invent this company. The first question I ask before I get to that in an interview is I say, "Can you please tell me one thing you want to do with your life so that you will have achieved one of your dreams? What is going to make your life epic for you?" And so I'm going to tell you the story. The first time I asked that, I thought this guy was going to, it was an engineering job. His name was Chris. And I thought the guy was going to say to me, "Mr. Hoffman, if this is some West Coast Zen thing, right? It's an engineering job." He didn't do that at all. I said, "Chris, before I tell you about the company, could you tell me one thing that's an important goal in your life so for you to achieve one of your dreams?" And he answered immediately. He said, "Yeah, that's easy, Jeff." He said, "I want to build a house I want to buy a house in Florida for my mother." And I said, "Whoa, okay, what's the story?" And Chris said, "Jeff, we grew up poor. They lived in the United States. As you guys know, if a lot of you aren't from here, we have mobile home parks, right? And in a mobile home park, he said, we were the poor people where the poor people live. He said, we didn't even have a mobile home. We had an Airstream trailer. The difference is a mobile home has doors and it has rooms, a kitchen, a living room, a family room, bedrooms. An Airstream is just a bedroom. There's nothing else." He said, "We were so poor that our Airstream was rusted and there were holes in the wall." He said, "We were so poor growing up that my mother and sister and I only had one blanket." And he said, I said, "What did you do?" He said, "In the winter, I had to take the blanket off my mom and my sister, and I had to put it over the holes so the snow didn't come in." And he said, "And then I would lay there at night watching my mother and my sister shiver." And he said, "Every night I would make a promise that I will work so hard and do so well that I will be successful enough to buy my mother a house in the warm Florida sun," I have it there, "as a thank you for the sacrifice she made of being my mother." I said, "Chris, you're hired." He said, "But you didn't interview me." I said, "Oh, yes, I did." Guys, an employee driven by passion and purpose far outperforms an employee driven by paycheck. You know what happens to a guy like that? One time we were struggling, and Chris came into my office, and he said, "What do we got to do?" And I said, "Well, don't worry about it. You can go back to product, right? I've got to figure this out." And he said, "No, I'm staying here until we figure this problem out." And I said, "Chris, you don't need to worry about this." And he said, "Oh, Jeff, I think I get it. You think this is about me and my job." He said, "I'm not in your office for me." He said, "I'm here because my mother's future depends on the success of this company, so I ain't going home until we fix the problem." Imagine having employees like that, okay? Employees driven by passion and purpose. So I ask people, tell me one of your dreams. And the dream is what I'm hiring them for. I can teach you skills. I can send you to class to write code, but I can't rewrite your DNA. I can't change the drive and the passion. So I'll tell you what I did. That's the actual picture. I printed this picture of a house in Florida, and I stuck it on the wall where Chris works. And the next morning, all my employees came in, and they said, "What is that?" And I said, "It's the reason Chris comes into this office every day. What's yours?" So you know what I did? I went around and I asked if you come into my office now, I asked every employee, all over the walls, there are what seem to be random pictures. They're not to me. They are the reason everybody that works for me works for me. I'll ask you this question. Do you know the people that work in your company what their dream is? Because their dream wasn't to make your company successful. They're only doing that because of their mom, their dream. I actually know the dreams of everybody that works for me. They're printed on our walls. And I'll tell you how this ended with employees like that. We sold the company. And when we sold the company, I gave everybody their cut. And by the way, I will say this to you. Greed doesn't work. As for founders, you hear this question all the time about equity. And I'm just going to tell you something. I give equity to everybody. And sometimes people say, how do you get that by the board and the investors? Sometimes I don't. I just give them some of mine. You know why? Because if I have the choice between owning 100% of nothing or owning 90% of a $10 million company, or would you rather own a way smaller percent of, like I said, our company's worth $170 billion today. It's worth that because the best damn people on the planet all work there. So do you want to own a way smaller percent of something huge, or do you want to be, congratulations, you own most of nothing because you kept the equity? Rock stars don't do it for salary. Rock stars know they're making you successful and they want a piece of the success. He would have never been able to buy his mom a house on a salary on a salary. It would have taken him forever to be able to do this. So we sold the company. Everybody had equity. I gave everybody their money. And we sent his mom on a vacation to Florida. Now, Chris's mom knew he made some money when we sold the company, but she didn't have any idea what. And so she thought her vacation to Florida for a week was his money, the reward. But at the end of the week, we brought her over to the house. And when we brought her to the house, this is kind of funny, because she walked in and she was angry. And she turned to her son and said, you know I live in this horrible condition, yet you brought me here to show me that your boss bought a house in Florida. And she turned to me and she said, take me home, take me to the airport right now. And she was very angry. Well, part of the reason she thought that was my house was because, remember I told you a trailer only has a bedroom? All the furniture was new, not hers. So she looked at it and said, that must be your boss's. And I said to her, okay, I'll take you to the airport, but you have to do me one favor. And she said, I want to go, I'm upset. And I said, fine, I'm just going to ask you to do me one favor and you can go to the airport. The problem is I didn't think this through very well. She said, what do you want me to do? And I said, I want you to come down the hall to the master bedroom with me. And she turned to her son, said, I don't know what favor your boss wants, but I'm not going in his bedroom. And I was like, well, I could have worded that differently. And I said, and Chris said something funny. He was trying not to laugh, and he said, Mom, do what my boss said. He drove. So she's like, okay, I need a ride, so what? So we walked down there. She said, I'll look at your bedroom, and then I got to go. Well, when we opened the door to the bedroom, I have to tell you that the reason we got her out of the house for the week is I had my employees ship me all the stuff out of that trailer. And one of the things that was interesting for Chris's mom, which I knew because I asked, right? So I'm telling you to go ask people what their motivation is. When she was in the middle of the night, she would get upset about the fact that she could not provide for her children. And in the middle of the night, she'd wake up at 3 a.m. and she would brush her hair 1,000 times because of the stress. But because she was too poor to turn the lights on even, she would every day at the end of the day, she would take her hairbrush and she'd put it on the nightstand and she would turn it exactly 90 degrees so she could find it in the dark in the middle of the night. So I had my team ship all of her stuff, and then I got her hairbrush and I went over and I put it on the nightstand and I turned it 90 degrees. And when she opened the door to that bedroom and realized that house was her, that was one of the greatest moments of my life. We are all hugging. We are all crying. I'm like, Mom, it's not even my mom, right? We're all hugging. I'm going, Mom, and I'm patting her. And I was like, this is why I do this. Man, this is the reason you work this hard, to be able to make other people's lives better. Your life will get better if you're focused on serving the kind of people that can bring you greatness. I hope that makes sense to everybody. I'm successful, thank you, because of Chris. She still calls me every year on the anniversary of that day and says, I can't believe I live here. It was completely paid. She gets to live there the rest of her life with no bills, because Chris did that. And I have to tell her, I didn't do this, your son did, right? This is Chris's work. And she keeps saying, but you gave us this opportunity. Every year I get the same phone call. Your job is to serve the people that will bring you to greatness. So I just wanted to share that with you because that's what people came back. You might want to know how this, at the end of that, it was amazing. Chris, I thought Chris was going to say to me, Mr. Hoffman, thank you for everything. I've achieved my dream. I'm out. I'm good. You know what he did? He looked at his watch. I said, what are you looking at your watch for? He said, we should get back to work. I said, why do you want to go back to work? He said, let's go back to the picture wall and see who's next. Imagine building a company around people like that. Why do our customers love us? Because I hire the kind of people whose heart the customers can feel. Customers know that we have passionate people that care about something bigger than their paycheck. And that becomes part of the brand of your company. The way this should look when you're done with it, I didn't know this, being honest. Everything I'm sharing with you, I learned later when I went back and asked people, why do you work here? Why do you like it, right? When people said to me, we work here because we think you think you're the employee, right? I didn't know that, but that was helpful. So here's another example of one day. I get in my office and I sit down to see my day and I pull up, we used Outlook back then, and I pull up Outlook and it's down. So I call my assistant and I said, Outlook is down. And she said, no, it isn't. And I said, no, it's down. It's completely blank. And she said, no, it's working. I'm looking at it. And I said, no, Outlook is down. My calendar is blank. And she said, Jeff. And I said, what? And she said, your calendar is blank because no one wants to talk to you. And I was like, wait a minute. My whole life has been a million meetings. And she said, well, you don't have any. And so I got up and I walked down the hall. I'm looking for something to do in my own company. So we have 3 conference rooms in a row. I go in the first conference room, and it's the product team. And I walk in, and I'm looking for something to do. And I'm like, hey, guys. I'm like, hey, Jeff. And I said, I said to the team, I'm grabbing a chair to sit down. And I was like, what are you guys up to? And they're like, we're doing a code review. And I said, cool. And I start grabbing a chair, and they start grabbing it back. And I said, well, what's up? And they said, yeah, we're in the middle of a code review. And I said, okay, I was just looking for something to do. And they're like, beautiful day out. Why don't you go golf? And I was like, you guys know I don't like golf. And I was like, okay, I get the hint, sorry. So I go to the next room, it's the operations team. And I'm like, hey guys, and I'm pulling up a chair. I'm trying to find something to do. And they're like, the team is like, we're doing a strategic operations review. I said, yeah, great, it sounds interesting. And they're like, looks like a super good day for golf, right? And I was like, by the way, for those of you who don't know me, I won't golf because it's not a sport if you can't play defense, okay? If I could block your shot with my club on the cue, I would play golf on the green. But I have to just stand there and watch you beat me. That's not sports. Sports have defense. So I was like, guys, I don't want to golf. I want to do something. So I go down to our 3rd conference room. It's my finance team. I open the door, and they're like, please don't slow us down. It takes so long to explain this to you. And I was like, fine. So I'm walking back to my office like this. I'm depressed, right? I can't find something to do at my own company. And a few minutes later, my 3 VPs come in, and they're like, can we talk to you? I said, what's up? And they said, are you sad? I said, I'm really sad. I have nothing to do at my own company. And they said, you should be celebrating. I said, celebrating? I said, what do you mean? And they said, you always keep a bottle of champagne in the fridge. I do in case somebody does something great, so we can celebrate it now, not someday, right? And they said, go get it, because you should celebrate. I said, what am I celebrating? They said, you did it. And I said, what did I do? And they said, the reason that there's nothing on your calendar at all is because everything is running perfectly. They said, every person you hired is the right person for the job. You trust them, they're empowered, they're trained, they're enabled, and we're killing it. We have no problems, and we don't need you right now because everything is working. They said, you should be celebrating that. I said, am I fired? And they said, no, you're promoted. And I said, to what? And they said, we want you to go back to being the chief dreamer, because that's how we got here. They said, we don't need you to run the company anymore. By the way, guys, you know what people do? You're on the beach with your family, and the phone rings like, oh, I got to take this. I'm a super important executive. I own the company. If you are out of the office, especially on a holiday, and your phone rings, you are not important, you are inefficient. If your company is designed right, no one calls you. If I say I'm going to be gone next week, they say, great, have fun, right? If no one calls you, you are a really good manager. If your phone keeps ringing, that's on you. You have not built a team that can handle the job without you. You are the problem. I didn't know that. My team said, we know you want to get into Europe. Why don't you spend the next 6 weeks exploring European markets? I took off because they said, we got this. The company's running great. Everybody knows their job, and we're all the right people for their job. Your job is to design yourself out of a job. The day you can leave and no one calls you, now you're doing your job correctly. That is when our company started to grow, not when I was making all the decisions and not when I was in the way. If they have to get your approval for everything, you're never going to grow. I wrote one book. The book is called Scale. And on page 1, it says, you won't scale until you get out of the way. Okay? Hope that makes sense to everybody. So here's the next question. How do you find rock stars? Because here is a simple truth. Rock stars don't wander into your office and say, hey, Jeff, I want to work for you. And rock stars, sometimes you get lucky, but when you post a job, who answers a job posting? Most of the time, people who lost theirs. Okay, that's why they're looking for a job. Rock stars aren't looking for a job. Rock stars have 5 people calling them, trying to hire them. So these rock stars I talked about are never going to wander into your office, and they're probably not going to reply to a job posting. So the question people always ask me is, how do you find these rock stars? And I'm going to tell you the answer. Go hunt them down. Get out of the office. They're not coming. And go find them. So I schedule days where I am not in the office and I am talent hunting. I tell my team, don't call me because I'm out looking for talent. Let me show you what that looks like. One day, I decided that I needed someone to run HR for me. Again, a lot of you are business owners who have never been an HR person, yet you're doing the interviewing, right? And you're figuring out compensation and you're resolving. One time, when I was way at the beginning and I only had those 3 employees I told you about, one of them ran down and get me and they said, Jeff, come quickly. The other 2 employees are arguing and I think they're going to fight, right? And I was like, fight? He said, yeah, they're pretty mad. So I'm running down the hall towards this potential fight of 2 of my only 3 employees. And the 3rd employee goes, what are you going to do when we get to the end of the hall? And I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do when I get to, I have no training in resolving an argument between difficult people. That's not what I'm trained in. Guess what? Someone actually is trained in that, right? So I was like, why am I making all the HR decisions? So I couldn't afford someone to run HR earlier on. But as soon as I can, that's why I'm telling you that even though you might be small enough that you can't afford to hire people smarter than you, every day you should be looking for those people so that the first day you can afford to bring them on, you bring them on. Okay? So at this point, I said I can afford an HR person now. So I started calling people. This is my talent hunting day. I am going to go find a rock star. And here's how that looks. I started asking everybody, where do HR people hang out? And I kept hearing this word I'd never heard called SHRM. And I finally said, what is SHRM? What does that word mean? And they said, Jeff, it's not a word, it's an acronym. It's the Society for Human Resource Managers. Never heard of it. So I Googled SHRM and I went to the website. And on their website, it said, don't forget to sign up for this year's Human Resource Conference. So I signed up. I went to the conference. There were like 1,000 people on a floor like that. Okay? Well, I think I have a picture. Yeah, when I went to the conference, there were like 1,000 people out there. And when I got there, everybody's badge was green because green means you're an HR executive. My badge was red. So I'm out there walking, I think in the big floor where all the people were. And as I'm out there, yeah, that's the SHRM one in the back there. You see the logo. And everybody walks up and they're like, why is your badge red? And I said, because I don't work in HR. And this 1,000 people said, then why would you come to the HR conference? What are you doing here? And I said, I'm shooting fish in a barrel because there's 1,000 of you and 1 of me and somebody's coming home with me. Okay? So they were like kind of nodding and looking. So I'm like, how am I going to interview 1,000 people? I can't interview 1,000 people. So I started thinking, at a conference like this, who are the speakers at any conference? They're probably the experts in the industry, right? That's who speaks at a conference. So I pulled out the program. There were 9 speakers. So I circled 9 names. Now I've acquired 9 targets out of 1,000 people. I got to find these 9 people. Then I'm looking, the lunch speaker, she is the winner of this year's National HR of the Executive of the Year. So I do 3 circles around her name. So at lunch, I go to lunch, and I meet this woman. Her name is Angela. The problem is, I want to just keep an eye on the time. The problem is that after lunch, everybody in the whole room goes running up to Angela. I can't get anywhere near her. She's just won HR Executive of the Year, right, for the whole country. Everyone's around her. All of a sudden, we can call it divine intervention. The PA system comes on, and the announcer says, all of you paid for breakout workshops, please go to the workshop you paid for. The whole room emptied out. So I didn't pay for anything because I'm not an HR person, right? I'm standing in the room by myself, and it's just Angela. She now goes back, and she's cleaning up her laptop up on the podium. And I said, hi. And she said, hello. And she leaned over, and she goes, why is your badge red? And I said, because I don't work in this industry. And she said, what are you doing here? I said, I need someone to run HR. And she started laughing. And I said, why is that funny? And she said, I just won HR Executive of the Year. You actually think you're going to talk me? And I was like, sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. And she said, I work for a big corporation and I have a big salary. And so she just turned her back on me and started walking away. And she said, and I said, you're right, I work for a startup, a small company. I can't pay the kind of salary your corporation gets. And now I will admit this to you guys. As a big sports fan, I have this bad habit of trash talking. And if you don't know what that is, right, that is saying stuff that you know isn't true just to get a response. So she turns her back on me. She's basically telling me, I have a big salary, I work for a big company, right, and don't waste my time. She just walks away from me. So as I'm walking out, I have to do my trash talking thing. And I said this. I said, tell your boss congratulations on his new house. Well, I have no idea who her boss is, and I have no idea that this dude built a house. I just said that. And she whipped around and stopped, said, how do you know my boss built a new house? And I was like, oh, I got that one right. And I said, I just assumed he did. And she said, why would you assume? You don't even know me. Why would you assume my boss built a new house? And I said, I looked up your company and you had a record year. And she said, we did. And I said, can I ask you something? I said, is part of the reason your company had a record year because of you personally? She said, I built the whole global team. She said, a lot of the reason we had a record year was for me. And I said, all right, well, I assume that everybody in management got enough bonus to build a new house. And I said, I assume you didn't. And then I started walking away, and she's like, hang on, right? And I said, what? And she actually said to me, my boss is building a big house. And she said, I wasn't upset about it till now, right? And she said, now I can't stop thinking about it. I did all the work, and the boss got the new house. I said, too bad you don't work for a startup, because you would have equity, and you'd be building a house right now. And then I turned my back on her. I start walking, and she goes, do you have time for lunch? I will tell you how it ended. Angela ran HR for my next 4 companies. I gave her a piece of the company. I brought her over. I could not pay her salary, but she wanted a piece of the action. She built all of those teams for the next 4 companies that I have. You have to hunt for talent and go out and find rock stars. They will not find you. I schedule time to do that. So your job, before I go on to this last part here, your job is to build the company where all the best people want to work for you and they never want to leave. That's different than running a company. I'll give you an example. There are some days besides talent hunting, you know what else I do some days? I just call them my culture days. I tell them, I'm not running the company today, don't ask me any questions. You know what I do? I go employee to employee and I ask this question. If I wanted to make this the company you never wanted to leave, what do I got to do? I ask them that. Imagine, try it yourself, ask company, ask your employees, to make this the best place you've ever worked, what do I as the owner need to do? And you know what most people said? Give me a minute, because no one's ever asked me that before. Every one of them said, I've never worked for anyone that asked me that before. Let me think about it. And they came back the next day. I'll give you an example. I had quite a few single moms that worked for me that I didn't realize we'd know until then. And the single mom said, I get stressed out over childcare. I drop my child off at somebody else's house or business, and I worry about them all day. And they said, the stress of worrying about my kid at childcare as a single mom has to have an impact on my productivity. And so, you know what I did? I said, we're going to start taking percentage of every dollar that comes in, and we're going to put it in the child care fund. And you know what we did? We built a little child care center at our office. I let my employees hire the people that work there, and they could literally go every day at lunch. They're in our building now. Child care is in our building. We have our own child care center. I would have never known that if I didn't ask. I have these mothers that say, my productivity's gone way off because I don't worry about my kid. I hired the people that manage my child. My friends and I, we take care of checking on each other's kids, and I can go see my kid anytime I want. And by the way, it's sort of like if you're worried about they'll go down there all the time. Let me put it this way. Somebody asked me, bless you, somebody asked me, how much vacation do you give your people? I said, infinity. And they said, how can you give them infinity vacation? And I said, because I don't count vacation days, I only count results. If you are doing your job and killing it, and you say, I'll be at the beach Friday, I say, send pictures and have fun. And if you're not doing your job because you're never here, you're fired anyway. You'll never use your vacation, infinity days, if you're not doing the job. Quit measuring the things that don't count. Rock stars don't want to be asked how many vacation days you get. Rock stars want to be asked, what product did you produce? What customer satisfaction rating did you create? If you focus on results, you should not care. I don't care if you go to the beach. I don't care what you're doing as long as I'm getting the results. Do it your way. If you're not getting the results, you're not going to work here anyway. And by the way, that's super important for you guys, is that letting people go that are not producing is difficult, but you have to do that. You can't drag people along. So I think this is the last part I have. The other thing that draws rock stars to your company is culture. And I will explain culture this way. Your values should be made known to everybody that works at your company. Your values should, by the way, that's a friend of mine. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. That's Tony Shea at Zappos. I was spending the day with him and his people. I was just showing you visibly what culture looks like. I had a sign on my door that I wrote, it's okay to have fun here. The one job I had, we were laughing about something, and my boss walked up and he said, I don't pay you guys to fool around. And I stupidly said, we're not fooling around, we're just laughing at something. He said, I don't pay you to laugh. And I said, do you think our productivity is higher if we're miserable? And I felt like saying, wait, don't tell me, because you're 3 levels ahead of me and you're the most miserable. I didn't say any of that, right? But I could see the answer. I did not do well in the corporate environment. So I'm going to give you an example of how important culture is. Because remember I told you I asked these people, why do you work here? This is a story that they told that I didn't even know, I didn't even think was a big deal. So I wrote this down on my wall. Your values should be written everywhere. It's not just your employees that see them. Your customers do, right? Customers want to spend money with somebody who actually has values and contributes to the world around them. They care more than you think about that, whether you're B2B or B2C. I had a huge corporate customer once that we made a contract violation, and technically we were supposed to lose it. And the CFO called me and said, technically you violated the contract and you lost us as a customer. And he said, however, he said, we had a staff meeting, and even though you're in violation of the contract, he said, I just found out that everybody that works for me wants to work for you, so we're going to renew the contract. He said, the way you guys run your business has been a role model for our people, and we don't want to lose this relationship. We survived a major contract violation. It was a mistake. Violation because of our culture. So I wrote this down. If any of you ever looked, I don't do much social media, but not long ago I posted a picture and it was side by side. It's a picture of me with the king of Saudi Arabia, and then in a meeting, and then the picture next to it is a woman that I'm going to tell you all about this. It's a woman, it's her, Maria, a cleaning lady. Okay? And I wrote underneath it, these 2 meetings are the same for me. And you know why? Because I don't treat the king with any improper. I treat him with all the respect he deserves. But guess what? I treat Maria the same way. I don't treat her less because she's the cleaning lady and he's the king. If you can't do that, you can't work for me. So I'd written that on the wall. And at this particular time, we were talking about doing a merger, a multi-million-dollar deal with another company. But our values are on the wall. And I'm asking you, are yours? Does everybody that worked there know what your values are at this company? And that was on the wall. And so we were debating this multi-million-dollar merger. This other CEO came over to my company to visit it and spent the afternoon. Then it was my turn to visit his company to make this decision. And he said, can you come after 5? And I said, why? He said, so my employees don't know I'm having a meeting with you. I was like, already that's a little culturally different. I tell my employees everything, right? But I got there, and because it was after 5, the lobby was locked. So I couldn't go in. So I called him. I said, I'm here, but your building's locked. And he said, I'm on a call. I'll be out 15, 20 minutes. And I said, no problem. I'll just sit here. So I sat down, the door opened, and Maria came in. About 30 minutes later, 25 minutes later was when he finished, and he came out. When this man walked out, he had this face on like he'd just seen something disgusting. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, did you just hug the cleaning lady? I said, okay, first of all, her name isn't cleaning lady. Her name is Maria. I said, second of all, she's a single mother who has 2 kids and one has special needs. And I said, yes, I gave her a hug. That's a tough load to bear. And he looked at me in disgust. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, what did you give the cleaning lady? I said, again, her name's Maria. She works for you, but apparently you don't know that, right? And I said, I gave her my phone number. He said, Mr. Hoffman, you're the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, and you gave the cleaning lady your phone number. Why would you do that? And I said, because apparently, and I didn't realize how sharp this was, I said, apparently she's under the poverty level with her paycheck, and she was unaware that if you have a special needs kid and you're under the poverty level, you can get free help from the state. I said, my team is going to pick her and her child up tomorrow, and we're going to take her down to the state and enroll her. She works for him, not me. And so he said, shook his head like I did something horrible. And then he said, you want to have the meeting? I said, our meeting's done. And he said, what do you mean our meeting is done? And I said, have a good, I didn't even know what to say. I'm a little embarrassed what I said. I said, have a good life, I guess, right? And he said, you're leaving? And I said, I've seen everything I need to see. The next day, my employees came in. And my employees said, well, what's the deal with the big multi-million-dollar merger? And I said, we're not doing it. And they said, oh, that's disappointing. Why? And I said, you guys remember Maria? And they said, yeah, we're bringing her clothes. We're picking her up. A couple of people volunteered to teach her English. And they said, we got it, Jeff. Don't worry about it. I said, I got in trouble for hugging her. Not one person in my company questioned that decision at all. Every single person said, we'll find another venture partner. Your values create a culture that attracts the kind of people you want to be around. When I asked these rock stars, why do you work here? They said, because this place has values. You have values. Do the people that work for you know what they are? And I will tell you, you need to do 2 things with those values. When people violate them, they're out. Okay? I don't fire people for making work mistakes. Humans make mistakes. But if you violate our policies, I had a guy that he was sweet to me, but he talked down to everybody in my company. He told our receptionist one day, get me coffee. And I was standing behind him. And I was like, whoa, we don't talk to people like that. He said, I outsell everybody in sales 3-1, but I'm in trouble because I didn't properly talk to the receptionist. I said, first of all, our receptionist is named Rebecca. And I said, secondly, yes, you can't talk to her like that. And he shook his head, and I said, you know what, 30-day probation. And he said, oh, what, you're going to fire me? I said, well, not for 30 days. I said, you have 30 days to somehow recombine your DNA, whatever it's going to take. He shook his head. 30 days later, I called Paul in, and I said, today's your last day. Don't come back Monday. He said, you got to be kidding. He said, I outsell everybody in this whole company 3-1. I said, that is true, my friend, but you out-asshole them 10-1. And I said, you don't need to come back anymore. Our productivity went up when I got rid of him. We we replace people that don't follow our values. Guess what else we do? We reward people. When you do compensation, compensation is based on KPIs. And did people achieve their work things? I have another set of compensation. If I see you demonstrating our values, like picking Maria and her child up, I will give you a cash bonus on the spot for living the values that this company supports. We compensate for values, not just for work, and we hire around our core values. So I'm going to stop there. We are out of time. I hope that this was helpful in understanding that servant leadership is the path. Your job is to find rock stars and build a place. Quit thinking money will solve your problems. Amazing people will solve your problems. Thank you guys so much for your time today. By the way, I don't know what's... is there something else in here right now? Good. Thanks. Can you turn this back on a sec? The message that I got from the organization was that you guys are all free to go, but if people want to do, they asked me if I would stay if anyone has questions. So you're all welcome to go, but there's not another speech in here now. So if you want to stay and ask questions, I'll stay.